मैं ब्राजील के राष्ट्रपति और मेरे मित्र लुला डी सिल्वा को हार्दिक शुभकामनाएं देता हूं और मैं उनको प्रेसिडेंसी का गेवल सौंपता हूं।
As Prime Minister Narendra Modi announced the conclusion of two-day G20 summit held in New Delhi today, here are some key highlights. World leaders including US President Joe Biden, UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and other world leaders arrived in national capital on Friday. As the world leaders and foreign delegates arrived at New Delhi's Bharat Mandapam on Saturday morning for the first day of the G20 summit, they were welcomed by Prime Minister Narendra Modi with a wall depicting Konark Wheel of Odisha as the backdrop for their photo op. Prime Minister Narendra Modi began the inaugural session of the G20 summit and talked about a human-centric approach to development. He also mentioned Morocco in the beginning of his remarks, where a massive earthquake took hundreds of lives on Saturday morning. Prime Minister Narendra Modi was identified as the leader representing Bharat at the inaugural session of the G20 summit. This created a controversy with prominent opposition leaders alleging that this was a move to officially drop India as the country's name. At the inaugural session, Prime Minister Modi also announced the inclusion of the African Union in the grouping. This marked a significant step ahead for India's engagement with the continent, where China has had a head start. It also falls in line with Modi's emphasis on India becoming the leading voice of the global south.
आप सबकी सहमति से आगे की कार्रवाई शुरू करने से पहले मैं अफ्रीकन यूनियन के अध्यक्ष को G20 के स्थायी सदस्य के रूप में अपना स्थान ग्रहण करने के लिए आमंत्रित करता हूं।
Congress MP Rahul Gandhi alleged that the government was hiding poor people and animals and said there is no need to hide India's reality from our guests. He was referring to the government's move to cover Delhi's slum clusters with green sheets. Meanwhile, G20 delegates reached a compromise on the language to describe Russia's war with Ukraine. The consensus declaration adopted by the G20 leaders called for, and I quote, comprehensive, just and durable peace in Ukraine and urged member states to, and I quote, refrain from the threat to use of force to seek territorial acquisition or act against the territorial integrity of any state. Prime Minister Narendra Modi held bilateral talks with Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida at the sidelines of the G20 summit. With the purpose of encouraging the use of cleaner fuels, India announced the launch of a global biofuel alliance at the G20 summit meeting in New Delhi and proposed to take a global level initiative to take ethanol blending in petrol up to 20%. By evening, G20 nations reached the consensus on New Delhi Declaration. Union Minister for External Affairs S. Jaishankar said that the message of India's G20 presidency is that, and I quote, we are one earth, one family, and we share one future, and that it draws on an age-old belief of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam.
और आप सभी के सहयोग से नई दिल्ली G20 लीडर्स समिट डिक्लेरेशन पर सहमति बनी है।
Prime Minister Modi on Saturday also announced the launch of the India, Middle East, Europe Mega Economic Corridor. The initiative involves India, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, the European Union, France, Italy, Germany and the US.
आने वाले समय में यह भारत, पश्चिम एशिया और यूरोप के बीच इकोनॉमिक इंटीग्रेशन का प्रभावी माध्यम होगा।
US President Joe Biden termed the launch of India Middle East a big deal and said that one is going to hear the phrase economic corridor more often in the coming decade. The ministers and chief ministers of various states were seen en route to Bharat Mandapam in order to attend the scheduled President's G20 dinner on Saturday. President Draupadi Murmu and Prime Minister Narendra Modi welcomed the leaders together. Kashmiri Kahwa, Darjeeling tea, Mumbai pav were some of the delicacies served to the G20 leaders and delegates at the official dinner. Meanwhile, countries India, USA, Brazil, and South Africa released a joint statement on Saturday on G20, reaffirming their shared commitment to the G20 as the premier forum for international economic cooperation. India put forward a proposal to launch a G20 satellite mission for environment and climate observation at the G20 Leaders Summit also. On Sunday, world leaders started arriving at Rajghat to pay tributes at the Mahatma Gandhi Memorial. United Kingdom Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and his wife Akshata Murthy, meanwhile, also visited the Akshardham temple in New Delhi and paid tributes. US President Joe Biden left for Vietnam after he and several other G20 leaders paid homage at Mahatma Gandhi's Memorial Rajghat in New Delhi on Sunday morning. Senior Congress leader Shashi Tharoor, meanwhile, on Sunday hailed India's G20 Sherpa Amitabh Kant for the Delhi Declaration consensus and said it was a proud moment for India at G20. Prime Minister Narendra Modi finally handed over the gavel of G20 presidency to the President of Brazil. The Prime Minister announced the conclusion of G20 Summit 2023.